Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Debate Hub. I am here. We are good to go. I am so excited. We've got Sal, we've got Bent, and we got Cindy, and I am so excited to be doing this one. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody, both in the chat and everybody here today. Sal, Bent, Cindy, how are all of you doing? I don't know if I've ever had all three of you in a room at the same time.
Definitely not, no.
Cindy's muted.
No.
Yeah, it looks like it's the first.
I've never met Ben. I've only talked to him. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
Hey, pasa. Hi,
Been a
Chesh.
long time since
no
we
see.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
Hi, Sal.
Yeah.
Hi,
My
Cindy.
long lost buddy.
Yes.
So I think we should probably start with who are you and what is it you say you do? Do we want to start with Sal, Cindy, then Bent? So Sal, do you want to introduce yourself to anybody who's foolish enough to not know who you are?
I'm Sal Cordova. I'm a molecular biophysics researcher and just a general troublemaker. I'm a evangelical Christian, and I nearly lost my faith about 20 years ago. So I actually, ironically, part of my return to the faith was because of some writings of atheists and agnostics like Bertrand Russell and Robert Jastrow. So I'm privileged to have a chance to join this discussion about the atheist communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Cindy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi. Am I allowed to ask Sal to elaborate? Who are those people and what was it that they said as an atheist that convinced you to go back to theism?
Absolutely. I will write that question down
Or is
and
that-
we'll just do everybody's introduction and then ask that. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
Okay, so Cindy, introduce yourself. We'll get Bent, then we'll get your question to Sal. So go ahead.
I think Cindy's frozen.
Oh, we lost Cindy again. Okay, Ben, you want to introduce yourself and we'll come back?
Hi, I'm Ben Hovind. I make music, and you've probably seen me on the Dapper Diner channel doing Kent with Bent. There's also an episode of Leaving Young Earth Creationism on his channel that I've done, and we do touch on a little bit on how close I was to leaving the faith altogether when I left Young Earth Creationism and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of thing today, I think. Yeah, that's it. That's me.
Awesome. Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself? Then we'll get to your question.
I missed most everything Ben said because I accidentally pushed the exit button instead of the something else.
Oh no.
My controls don't show unless you touch something.
Insert that's what she said here. Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody and then we'll loop back around?
Okay. I'm Cindy Lincoln. I got saved in 1984. Just basically with somebody telling me that, did I believe that Jesus was God's son? Did I believe Jesus rose from the dead? And did I believe he died on the cross for my sins? And at the time, all I could say was, I guess so, I've always heard that. And then shortly thereafter, I had an aha moment where I went, oh my gosh, he did. And God Almighty came to earth. And then I went through all the questions. Well, what about the Bible? Is it true? Was he? I remember the hugeness of the revelation that, oh my gosh, the Creator, not just God Almighty, the Creator came to earth. And in '89, I ran into Henry Morris and the Institute for Creation Research, which I'm sure Sal will tell me about the flaws in some of their science. But nonetheless, it cemented my faith in the Word that these stories that we read in Genesis are not fairy tales, that they are plausible in light of resurrection power. He's got the power to raise the dead. He's got the power to create something from nothing. So I've been on fire for that ever since.
So it looks like we've got two people who got close to losing their faith or did to a degree and then were able to come back. And Cindy, who's been rocking it hard the whole time. So
Thank you.
I think you've got some questions for Sal. You wanted to know a little bit about what writings and atheists had changed Sal's mind in a direction sort of more towards a God belief.
From an atheist.
Yeah.
He said from an atheist's writings. And
Mhm.
Chesh, you didn't share your story.
it was
I don't have
Bertrand
a story.
Russell's. Yeah, the specific essay was Bertrand Russell's "A Free Man's Worship," or a title close to that. And he talked about how the solar system will end and all of man's achievements, his heroism, will lay in ruins. And I said, something really resonates with me on that. I said, it was at a time when I nearly walked out of the church because I kept saying, you guys can't just believe just because you want to believe. I mean,
Mhm.
is it too much to ask for some facts? And and then I hung around the atheist community, and I said, man, it is so good where I'm not, you know, I'm not shunned, I'm not ridiculed, I'm not denigrated for asking tough questions. I said, this is wonderful. I love hanging out with you guys. And then I asked, well, how do you have meaning in your life? And then suddenly it's like drawing blanks. And then I looked at Bertrand Russell's essay. He said, there's no sound philosophy can be built unless it's built on a foundation of despair. And I said,
Hmm.
that resonates with me. If this is all going to end, it says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ is not raised, if there's no life, then let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So I said I would be the sort of atheist that let me eat and drink, for tomorrow I die. At some point it's just going to end. Let me just try to minimize pain. And I said no. I said, I did not have a bad relationship with a lot of the atheists. I mean, later on, as I became returned to the faith, then I started having some really bad relationships, and we can get into that. But at that time, I said, guys, I sympathize with where you are. I've had it with the church. I hate the way they treat me for asking questions, expressing doubts, being denigrated, shunned, and I said, this is intimidation and brainwashing. This isn't the way I learned science. This isn't the way to deal with people with tough questions. But I said, guys, if I follow what you have, then, unless you can offer something better, let me eat and drink, for tomorrow I die. That's about all I have to live for at this point. And I think I want, what little scraps of evidence I have, I think I'll go with that. And that was the return of that was my return journey to the faith. So when I meet, not so much atheists now, but Christians that are just on the edge, where they ask exactly the same questions. They'll relate to me the questions that atheists bring up to them. I said, those are actually really good questions. How did they treat you in church when you start asking those pointed questions?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
a lot of times they'll relate to me just the way I got treated, and I said,
Yeah.
you know, that's that kind of sucks. So that's my experience.
That's fascinating. Bent, you don't get
Mhm.
you spend a lot of time online, like working with Dapper
Mhm.
and kind of where you're to be found, spending a lot of time criticizing the sort of handful of like young earth specific Christian science. But your experience with there's a lot of atheists in that area of the internet.
Right.
How do you find your experiences in that case?
I actually kind of agree with Sal because my experience, well, I'll just say my experience in a church, I was not treated well. I was judged a lot. I was held to an impossibly high standard. Atheists that I talk to, they don't do that. They just let me be me. So it's really not that big of a deal for me to interact with most atheists because they're just dealing with their own lives. They're not trying to judge me. They're not concerned about my soul. They don't think I have one. So, you know, that's been my experience. And I gotta say, I kind of like being treated that way better than I do having been in the church and being treated the way they treat me. I don't think that's really off the mark because a lot of support for loving your neighbor in the Bible, and they choose to judge their neighbors instead. I'm not a fan of that. And yeah, that's
I
the way
think
it goes.
that's fair. Cindy, you've had an interesting ride as far as I think most people are aware of here. When it comes to like the church and religious groups and into the sort of the online sphere that you kind of dipped your toes into a little bit here and there. What do you think? How has your experience been between the church and between dealing with atheists online?
I have had the most horrific experiences that I couldn't even imagine in the church from people who said that they were Christians and weren't. And part of that might be my fault because I didn't recognize them or I should have seen red flags. But nonetheless, people who claim to be Christians have hurt me way, way worse than anybody else. And when I couldn't get the Christians to come to my assistance in bringing Kent Hovind to account, the atheists were there to help me. And I was told, they don't care about you sincerely. They just want to slam Kent. But anyway, it's been nice to have somebody who understands narcissism, fraud, how people can actually look like sheep. It's crucial to be understood because frauds tell you that you're crazy, that you're seeing things, that you're judging, or, all manner of other bull crap. And you guys understood. AJ has a very good understanding of who Kent Hovind is and what a narcissist does. And it was just a breath of fresh air for me. And even Joanna, she's turned on me now, but she received therapy from AJ's understanding as well. And Dapper.
Dapper's in the chat saying, I can care about Cindy and want to slam Kent.
Yeah.
Why not both?
Yeah.
I'm here for both.
Easy.
Well,
Easy.
it sounds to me like you guys have sort of had an experience where there's a lot of judgment coming from an invalid source. It's not like, oh, people are being critical of your ideas or your questions. It's people are being judgmental for you, but like towards you as people for asking questions that they also probably asked themselves.
Well, for me, it's more than like people would be judgmental, and then I would like, okay, I'll adapt and behave a different way for them, and then they don't like that either. So whatever you do, you're wrong, and you're judged anyway. May as well just be yourself, right? But it's easier said than done,
So do you guys find
that is a very good point, Ben, because when you're trying to be a good Christian, you're trying to be humble. If somebody criticizes you, you don't automatically want to say, well, you're wrong. I'm never wrong. You want to introspect. You want to say, gee, are they right? I want to listen. I want to be
when it's a
humble.
group of people instead of just one-on-one, that peer pressure can really have an impact. And there can be gaslighting involved too with that kind of thing.
Can be.
Pretty bad.
You think?
Yeah, it can get really bad.
And it's that they actually feel like they have a right to tromp on somebody else. It's very strange.
It's really weird.
Well,
I mean, in very hurtful ways. Sorry, Sal, go ahead.
I said I think I'm finally figuring some of this out. It's where I really found the phenomenon powerful, and it's related, but we have clinical evidence. There has been what they call psychic pandemics, and it's in bulimia and in anorexia. And particularly for anorexics, it's like you could try to rationalize and reason. They look in the mirror, they're skinny thin, and they think they're fat. It can be reinforced by the relationships with other girls. I mean, anorexia is really prominent. It's more of a female one woman said, it's more important to be in the tribe than deal with reality. More important to be in the tribe than deal with reality. I'm just like, that is really powerful. So a girl could be starving herself to death, but if she's in the right tribe that kind of says, hey, it's really cool to be the way you are, and she finds acceptance in the tribe, and she identifies, yes, there's an inherent tendency already to, from whatever pressures, we don't completely understand the condition, but it can be multiplied. So whatever seed there was to trigger the anorexia, it can be just multiplied by being part of the tribe. And I'm finding that a lot of church stuff is socialization, being part of the tribe, and they enforce rules to enforce that identity. And then it took me a long time. I said, oh, this isn't about evidence, truth, or whatever. This is about being part of the tribe. And then that really kind of totally shook my whole worldview. I said, is this, all a fantasy? And then especially now, as some people know, I'm in an ongoing lawsuit over $200 million property. And I can't talk about that, but it's whatever there is public.
Yeah. Yep.
As I began researching, I said, these churches, they're churches that are scamming people. There's an organization, 8 indictments were handed down for $550 million in Southern Baptist Convention Church, Southern Baptist Church of Arizona, 8 convictions. And I said, at some point you just see, oh, the leadership kind of enforces kind of like the idea of having sheep and controlling them. You can just prey upon them and scam them for hundreds of millions of dollars. And, they're enforcing this tribe. And it is just horrible.
Would this fall under like the false prophet heading and like using God's name in vain type of situation?
Bingo!
I call it wolves in sheep's clothing.
All of the above.
Yeah.
So when Sal was saying about bulimia and tribe acceptance, some of church culture is to be a part of a tribe. But the other thing is it's looked upon by predators as good pickings because Christians supposedly are honest, forgiving. I can screw you and you have to forgive me. How convenient.
Right?
And so it's right picking for a predator. A predator, I learned when I was studying narcissism, they actually look for honest people because then you won't suspect that they're lying. You'll think that they are like you.
Yeah, a matter of projection, yeah. So it sounds like what you guys are telling me is there seems to be some problems within not necessarily the belief of God or not the belief in God, but something that we can all kind of commiserate on is problems of institutionalized religion and the way those groups or those religious groupings or churches operate as a whole.
I wouldn't put it on an inanimate object like an institution or a church. I would put it on evil people.
Oh, sure. Like evil people taking advantage of a social construct. Okay.
And in fact, Jesus had very severe words to say about wolves in the church. He had warnings. He said, beware, wolves. I think Sal quoted that to me, and that really helped me. Wolves will come in unawares. And there's other verses about God basically saying to the shepherds, you have screwed my flock. And Aaron Ross said it the best about Kent Hovind and predators in the church. He called it bilking old ladies of prayer donations. How much more shameful can you get than that?
Yeah, I think you find that on a lot of like televangelism stuff. So stuff that's like plays late at night and is on TV and is like selling you something, and basically the whole church service is just a giant product placement.
Isn't that weird?
So
and when Kent used to always hold up his seminar series, only $50. I always thought, well, he's got to make a living, I guess. But now I'm like, wait a minute. I don't.
That's a little excessive.
Yeah. What do you got, Sal?
A little excessive.
So I was just saying, as
Sorry.
far as atheist communities, it was heartening to see at least someone cared for Cindy, because I was one of there were like three Christians at first, and then a few more that were, Robert Beatty, Christopher Johnson, and then people like Bent that were standing up for her. And I just about cried. I said, "Is no one going to stand up for her? This is so wrong." And I said, "I'm going to stick my neck out. Get an earful for this." And I've been shunned for the community for standing up for her. And who else has stood up for her? It was the atheist community. And I got to say,
And
I was just grateful suddenly she just had this new family that really cared for her the way I thought she should be cared for. And I was kind of very disappointed with people claiming to be believers. They started calling me all sorts of names and stuff after that. I'm like, okay, I'll take it. I don't have anything to lose at this point except my reputation. So,
it
those are my
wasn't just,
comments. Yeah.
it wasn't just a failure to stick
Sorry.
up for what was right or to stand against what was wrong. It was a full on frontal attack. I'm evil for saying anything bad about God's anointed. It was a full on front. It is today a full on frontal attack. I'm getting slandered today and have been for 2 years for going against the Lord's anointed.
I will take this opportunity to say there is a link to help Cindy out down below in the description. So if you're interested in helping Cindy out, please go and check out her link. It is labeled in the description, so feel free to hop in down there and see what that's about. Okay, so just to sort of refocus, because we kind of talked about some of the good things about the atheist community is that they have been less judgmental when it comes to certain things, but more judgmental when it comes to others. So they seem to be very accepting when you're coming out of faith, but if you turn around and go the other way, they seem to be not too impressed. How did that? I think Sal brought that up a little bit. How did that go?
It got worse because particularly I was in the debates about
Mm,
creation evolution, and that's what kind of returned me to faith. Not so much young Earth creationism, although
okay.
I am a young Earth creationist now. Used to be what they call a theistic evolutionist, so I'd probably be kind of where Bent is now. Then I became a old Earth creationist, and then then a young Earth creationist. But as I just started debating the science, boy, then the hostility came and all the demeaning. And I said, "Gee, I feel like I was being treated like I was in church.
Wait a minute.
This is all over again."
Hold
I
up.
said, "This feels kind of just like the same indoctrination that was being shoved down my throat." And I
Mm,
said, "Isn't this interesting? You have fundamentalists and tribal leaders kind of on both sides, and they just same operating principles." Because when I was in the engineering, I was an engineer before I ended up being a quote unquote biologist. I really don't fancy myself as a biologist, but that's how I'm perceived now, because most of my public scientific publications, are in biology.
right.
Um, you were valued when you raised issues. It's like, oh man,
Mm,
good call, Sal. Thanks for telling us that's wrong, because then the airplane won't blow up or the spaceship won't blow up or
right.
lives lost. It's like that's it's you know uh, suddenly when I started to ask questions that started to hit home that kind of were friendly to creationism, that a creator God, it's like, oh, this is suddenly it wasn't about science anymore. All the ad hominems. I said, guys, shouldn't you welcome skepticism? And it's been an uphill road
Mhm.
since. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is, and I've observed this in the community, but I think it's really more on the online side
Sure. Yeah.
than it is on the personal side. You just get a lot of creepy people on both sides on the internet, and it is
Fair.
freaking me out.
That is fair.
I have people saying they're being stalked. I feel I'm being cyber stalked by someone, and I'm not going to mention
Mhm,
that person's
mhm.
name. Occasionally, we meet really swell people. Like, it's public knowledge. I said Chesh is my internet crush. He's like my most
Oh.
wonderful, you know,
Oh.
atheist person, and but I'll tell you what really kind of alarmed me was the whole thing with the lawsuit between Richard Carrier and PZ Myers.
Oh
and the
God.
vitriol in an elevator gate, Rebecca Watson versus Richard Dawkins, and I saw the vitriol and death threats atheists were sending against each other. And I'm
Mm.
like, this is really scary. For a change, I said, I'm glad I'm not on the receiving end of this anymore. You guys are going after each other. This is freaking scary, guys. And you're all about reason and rationality. And people were saying, hey, they want to. Sorry to use language, but they're trying. They said, I think I want to. They're saying they wanted to rape Rebecca Watson and
Mm.
all these.
Mm.
I'm just like, guys, um, this doesn't feel like a very friendly community, you know? I said, I don't
I'm
want to
getting
wade into that.
disillusioned.
So
Oh no.
every now and then I get to, it's really hard to generalize, but I will say that I've seen some really scary extremes. And I said, I don't want any part of that. I said, if that's how they're treating each other, you know, I don't want to be on the receiving end if I don't want to get in arguments with people like that. So
Right.
that's,
I've heard
that's
somebody
what I began
say
to
that
see.
there are two kinds of atheists, and the militant atheists and the friendly atheists. I can't
Mm.
remember who was saying that, and that might not be the right vocabulary, but you get the point.
Yeah, there's definitely like
I think that's just people.
yeah, I think
I
I
think
would
that's just
agree.
people
Yeah.
in general, though.
Mhm.
Because you have Christians who are like that too. Some are pretty terrible people,
It's
but some
I
are
was
really
thinking that
nice and
too.
sweet and loving. And like, honestly, I think it's just a coincidence if they happen to be an atheist or if they happen to be a Christian or if they happen to be something else. People tend to be people,
Mhm.
regardless of what they believe. It's not easy to change who you are to try to be like a good Christian or a good atheist or a good whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I
Um,
find that there's a lack of a sort of because of the way I think we tend to treat philosophy, particularly moral philosophy, because it is very, very difficult. It is a hard subject to talk about and cover because it
Very
covers some really
personal.
difficult and very personal things. It there isn't whereas in religion there's kind of no matter which religion you look at, there's sort of a cohesive rule and cohesive rules that have kind of been onset, whereas atheism doesn't inherently have that. So if you're an atheist, all you're not really saying whether or not you believe one thing is morally right or morally wrong. You have to figure that out by yourself, and I find the atheist community doesn't currently provide that sort of any help in figuring out what your personal framework would be.
Any help being in a good way, or any help meaning they
Help
don't
meaning
pressure
like
you to have a
ed
certain standard?
yeah, I think there's definitely plenty of pressure, and it tends to be coming from a political side of things. But, I mean, by help, I mean, like, a general education about, like, critical thinking and skepticism and sort of if you're coming from a place that's really dogmatic, like I think all 3 of you described, I don't think it should be atheists' job to make other atheists, but I do think that atheists could play a very beneficial role to say, "Well, here's some tools to help you sort of deprogram from that, and then go and figure out whatever it is that you want to figure out." I don't think people should be meh at each other like that. Like Sal's, for example, Sal's arguments for young Earth creationism are far more nuanced a lot of the time, and in particular areas of science, like I would say that are not as bold-facedly ridiculous as a lot of what we hear from young Earth creationism most of the time.
Thanks. Thank, yeah, thanks for the plug, Chesh.
Hey,
My internet blinked out briefly. I did want to say to Cindy's point, there is a study by skeptic and atheist slash agnostic Dr. Christopher Silver. He's a PhD psychologist, um, educator. He's a social psychologist. He did research into the personality types of atheists, and he has like a typology of 6. And the one that we most identify on the internet as an atheist is what he calls the um, the anti-theist, the anti-theist. And so this typology was really he did a psychological profile of anti-theists. Okay, so this is not Christians or whatever classifying the atheist. This is an atheist who said, okay, let's classify them. Let me, we can't. He said the anti-theists, um, they're highest on the scale of anger, narcissism, unagreeableness, and social dogmatism. I was
Whoops.
like, whoa. He had
And
another
you would have to,
category. He had another category of seeker agnostic. And that actually, I said, that describes me. They like entertaining both sides of that. They're not very confrontational. And I said, yeah, I get along with that type of atheist really well. And so that would be like my professors. I remember going through grad school. My professor was Richard Dawkins' drinking pal in Oxford, and he was teaching physics at Johns Hopkins. And this sounds kind of funny. It was because of him I got through school, because he kind of encouraged and gave me good grades. And I said, I thank God for this atheist. Thank you. And
Oh.
he had greatest personality. So it's I don't like generalizing, like one example of someone who claims to be an atheist and say that's how they all are, because they're all individuals.
Right.
like Ben was saying. And I would have to say also, like what Ben was saying, there's a Christian partner to what you just said. So instead of an atheist, you said an anti-theist. Well, there are anti-atheists in the Christian community, namely someone that, and the problem with both of them is that they think that they have some kind of a high moral standing where they can just shove their opinions down other people's throat without any respect, without any appreciation for the fact that we are all free to choose.
Do you guys find it ironic that there's a large portion of I would probably argue both communities, if you were going to like umbrella them both into these really large groups, that are saying, "Hey, we're not gonna tell you what to do, but we're also not gonna listen to a single thing that you have to say, and you should just believe this thing or else."
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
There's a lot
I
of
mean,
tribalism, but it's kind of hard. I think it's almost hardwired into the human psyche to
oh, I
identify with.
absolutely. I don't think tribalism is inherently bad, but I find it's really difficult to sort of the church is so large, for example. So if you say the church and you mean the Roman Catholic Church, the Protestant, every denomination of Christianity, you're dealing with a lot of people. So how do you self-police that? And then on the other side, you've got different atheist groups popping up, and they can barely self-police anything. Look at what's gone on with Atheist Alliance International. You want to talk about a complete lack of being able to self-police. So what are you supposed to do at that point? And as Christians, watching the atheist community be completely inept at doing the thing that they've been asking religious people and religions to do, and how hilarious that is.
it's not
I think it's
easy to
funny.
do. It's really not easy. You have to get a lot of people who are in the same mindset and who want to do things the right way, and who are willing and able to do that and working together for that kind of thing. And that it sounds pretty hard, but like it's really hard, in my opinion, on that.
Cindy,
So
what do you
kind of
think?
what you were saying before, that it's about finding people that are like-minded. It's not about another kind of a word umbrella. It's just finding people that are like-minded.
So how does that square with tribalism being potentially problematic, though?
The other thing I was thinking about, just how I was saying tribalism is inherently human, and I think I would rephrase that a little bit to say that being defensive is inherently human. Nobody wants to admit that they're wrong, and a lot of people think that they need to defend their position to the death. I think that's the problem. And I think all of us can introspect on that and say, I don't want to be like that. What can we learn from these evil people that have hurt us? How not to be.
How not to behave, how not to treat others.
How to
Well,
recognize it when it happens another time. Sorry, go ahead, Sal.
How to see it and how to respond to it, and how to be there for others when you see it happening to them. That's a really important thing, and you'll
Wow,
get that
that's
from
a good one.
Christians and atheists alike, because it's a personality. I don't know if that's a personality trait, the way I described it, but that's what good people do when they're being good, regardless of what they believe.
That when they see
Well,
someone being abused, they're going to come in and be an encourager or a
They'll be a
defender.
good Samaritan. Yeah, exactly.
I like that, Ben.
Well, I like your question, Chesh, and I don't really have an answer to like how do we get this policed.
Yeah.
And so my policy later in life is actually Jordan Peterson's advice. He said, "Don't even
Oh
think about
God.
trying to change the don't even think about trying to change the world. Why don't you try to clean your room first? If you can't even do that, which I'm having problems doing,
Yeah.
then focus on that." So I'm just like, yeah, I could see the problems. I don't have answers to solutions. I mean, I don't have solutions to those problems. I said, I think maybe I'll just manage where I'm messed up, and we'll go from there. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, I certainly have opinions on scientific matters. I'll fight that. But as far as trying to fix other people's behaviors, it just, it's something I don't want to touch. It's like I have a hard enough time managing myself. So that's kind of where I'm at.
There's certainly a degree of like talking about what you can, and Sal, just given by what you've described, sort of your experience through life has been, is that you're not gonna die on a hill that you don't necessarily believe in. So you're far more, as much as you're arguing for young earth creationism now, or that you argued for old earth creationism in the past, you're liable to have your mind changed down the line about one thing or another. As all of you seem to be relatively malleable when it comes to getting new information or being convinced one way or another. However, I do take umbrage with you bringing up Peterson on my goddamn stream. Oh God!
You
No.
said the GD word, Chesh.
I did.
You're evil.
Yeah.
You're demonic. You're bipolar.
Bipolar. Oh no. Well, on the other hand, we can talk about Jordan Peterson another time. There's so many better people you could have quoted for that clean your room shit, but no, we get Jordan Peterson. God.
Okay, all right, Chesh, if you say, Sal, clean your room, I'll quote you. Would that make you feel better?
Yes, that would make me feel so much better. Sal, clean your room and take care of you. And nobody's going to be better at taking care of you than you are. So take care of yourselves, everybody.
I don't think,
all right,
Chesh,
I'd like to quote Chesh here. She said, Sal, clean your room.
Yeah.
There you go.
Edit out the other part.
We'll talk about Jordan Peterson another day. Go ahead, sorry.
I don't think that Sal was conflating malleability with allowing other people. I don't think he was conflating malleability with trying to change somebody else.
Oh, I agree.
I don't think he was saying that his young earth creationism is going to go away. I think it's going to get stronger, but he is not going to push anything down somebody else's throat because it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't think showing up to a debate and, debating for your side is shoving anything down anybody's throat. That is like everybody has consented to the conversation that's happening. And I think that's something that tends to get confused online. It's like you are consenting to be here, or you're choosing to enter the conversation or have that conversation. And I do feel like there's sort of like a friction there about who's choosing what to say to who about what conversation they're walking into. I see that on Facebook sometimes. I'll see people, because I don't spend a whole lot of time there, and I see a handful of people's posts where they're like, oh, I was talking about atheism versus agnosticism, and then somebody comes in and being like, why are you talking about philosophy? And then a religious person comes in, it's like, because theism is philosophy, and it's just like this weird like conversation that I can't follow.
It's the same old thing. Why do you think you can tell somebody else what? That's not how friends interact. Like,
No,
hey,
it's
I
not.
think that you shouldn't be doing this or you should be doing this. Um, unless you see somebody like walking into a mine field or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know. Yeah.
It's one of
When you
those
think
things you're
you've,
talking about interfering with somebody's life directly, right? Being so forceful.
I don't know. I guess I'm probably guilty of that because I'm trying to interfere right now with DAL people and shake
Mm-hmm.
them up and get them to see, look, this guy is not who you think. You're in danger. Don't support this guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that
I
case,
don't
you
know.
do have like a whole justification built into a lot of religions to say, hey, listen, no, no, you're going to suffer. You are in mortal danger or immortal danger, depending on how you parse that. And directly wanting to influence people's lives. But you run into some serious problems if you start saying, hey, you can't be gay because it is a like it is a danger to your immortal soul. And it's like, you start crossing a line there, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of control of other people that comes into play there.
Mm-hmm.
And to reiterate what I said earlier, I don't think we're called in the Bible to control other people. I think we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I know I want to be treated respectfully and with support by my friends, so that's what I do.
So then it sounds like a matter
There's
of
no room for
approach.
judgment in there, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
There really isn't. That's not going to come from me.
It sounds like
I
a
wish other
matter.
Christians would behave that way, though.
It sounds like a matter of approach. Do we need
Well,
a
and it,
channel for Bent that's just like how to approach people and not be a piece of garbage?
How to
Christian
be good to
edition.
people. Yeah.
Well,
How to love your neighbor
and
more.
yet it's we can't go to the other extreme where it's like, hey, anything goes. You want to molest your kid? No problem. I'm just going to sit here and be quiet because I don't want to judge. I mean, there's a balance
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in there.
Right, but you can judge someone for that, or you can just call the police.
There's
You
also
know what I
like the
mean?
difference between whether or not somebody is being harmed, right? In a matter
One
of
of those,
one of them is
right,
is consensual and the other one is not, right?
right. So if it's
although,
something like that, that's not consensual and not okay. Yeah, you can take action while still, because what good would it be to judge someone for that and then just that's it? Now they know better, but they're still doing it. That doesn't solve the problem. You still need to get the right people involved and take care of it the right way.
Hmm.
well, for me,
I
you
know.
know, truth often hurts, and you know, it's like opening my bank account. Like, man, I don't like the numbers. So,
I think we can all relate to that.
No,
so, um, so for me, I mean, you brought up like homosexuality and stuff, and there, I would be on the extreme conservative side on my views. So I would say, hey, if you're practicing homosexual, I don't think you're going to make it to heaven. That's my view. Do I will I necessarily treat them any less than a human being? No. Uh, but if they ask me, that's what I think. And it's like, okay, you could take offense to what I think, hey, but you're not going to be harmed by me personally. And that's
The
it.
other
You
thing
may not
is,
like it. And so for me, it's like, do you fundamentally believe that the Bible is God's word? One, that there's a God and that he communicated his word, his law through there. And when someone asked me about homosexuals before, he said, "What about gays?" I said, "Okay, what about Uzzah? Do you remember the story of Uzzah in the Old Testament? He was trying to steady the ark of the covenant because it was falling off the mules or oxen, and
Mm-hmm.
he just touched it, and God's wrath this zapped him." I said, "Look, guys." The God of the Bible is not Santa Claus. He's a lot more harsh than you could ever possibly imagine. Okay, you may not like that. If you decide, hey, that it can't possibly be real, that's a fantasy. It's like, okay, that's on you. I'm not gonna be harsh. But for me, if I believe that God is that way, that he's real, then I live my life a certain way. But I don't go around, you know, um, like Matt Powell or whatever. It's
Oh,
like, no,
right.
you don't.
Yeah.
You don't enforce your beliefs on others that way. That, one that doesn't instill real faith anyway.
Yeah, I
So
think what you're talking about is the
yeah,
difference. What's really important, which is the way I think we're getting at, is the approach matters. How you go about talking to people, whether or not you're imposing or whether or not someone's asked you, versus whether or not you're trying to enforce change from like a political standpoint, which is a whole nother shtick. Like, if it's not your job to judge and it's
Yes.
not your job to condemn, you can have your opinion, but are you going to go around and condemn other people?
That's a very interesting point because
yeah,
homosexuality used to be illegal.
Mhm.
But the thing that really upsets me with that whole Matt Powell position that homosexuality or homosexuals should be killed, it's like, why pick on them? What about liars and thieves,
And
Right, if
murderers?
all sins being equal, right, in the eyes
if
of
all
God.
sins are equal, I had a problem with alcohol for a long time. That's a sin. That's a big deal.
Mhm.
And why not pick on me? Oh no, it's fine.
I
Just
think that
pick
there's
on
something to be
homosexuals
said
instead.
for, would the world be a better or different place, or would people have less of a problem with religion if they treated the sin of homosexuality the same as the sin of lying, and being like, nobody really cares.
Right.
You're not going to jail for lying, right?
Actually, you can go to jail for perjury.
Well, that's a very
Perjury
particular situation.
obstructs
Yeah.
justice.
Yeah, but you're not going to go to jail for having consensual homosexual sex with a judge.
well, in the Old Testament, I mean, people were stoned for violating the Sabbath. I mean, all sorts of things. So I mean, it's exactly what you say. It's like, why single out one thing? And that's why I like the example of Uzzah. Just like, okay, guys, you know, if you're gonna, what you're doing is singling out. Again, it's a little bit of tribalism.
Mhm.
It's like you're not actually treating the Bible the
Well,
way it is because
you're picking on something that is you believe it's socially acceptable for you to pick on,
exactly,
when it's
exactly.
and with that changing, what do you do and where do you go with that?
Yeah,
Well, and why? I mean, I guess, I don't know.
yeah.
All it does is
So for
alienate
me, yeah,
people. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the whole thing about anti atheists
Mm-hmm.
or anti theists. All it does is alienate people. It's not going to help bring anybody to to, to see, hey, Jesus is your savior.
so going back to this whole thing of like, I have certain ideas of how I think society might be better, but I I've really tried to take into heart that I got to start changing myself first,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I may have my ideas. I will say something as far as handing down Christianity or Christian morals in a society via politics and law. People said, "Well, should we teach creationism in public schools?" And I'm just like, I don't know that I'd want someone who hates creationism being required to teach it to the kids.
Right.
One, they may not do as good a job. And I've asked Christian parents, I said, "Are you comfortable with someone who hates Christianity or someone who's Muslim teaching Christian creationism to your kids? I mean, does that make any sense?" So, um, one of the hard things as far as we have public schools, how do we legislate what is teaching what's moral and immoral? And it's a little easier just to teach math and science, reading, writing, and arithmetic rather than trying to communicate morals, uh,
It
via law.
is, but do
Because
you know,
yeah,
Oh, you can do something
it is.
completely legal that is absolutely morally abhorrent.
Hmm. But behavior is really important in the schools because I was a teacher and you can't just let Johnny bully Susie and you can't let Johnny steal from Susie and you can't let students disrespect the teacher. there has to be some moral element.
Ben, what are you thinking?
Or you have chaos if you don't.
I think we have chaos anyway, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you to repeat the question.
Oh, well, we're just kind of talking in general when it comes to like moral theories and how to approach these types of things, because you have tribalism on one hand and things that you believe are socially acceptable,
Okay.
right? And so is it okay that because you think you're socially acceptable in the clear, does that change what is morally okay, right? Because we're talking about legally as well, right? Legally, something can be like by the law or not by the law and be legal, like stoning somebody to death. But is stoning somebody to death actually a moral thing to do, or is that maybe on God to decide? And the same thing applies to social expectation and standards.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I'm just gonna reiterate again, like I'm gonna step back from the tribalism thing because it's everywhere, and I can
It
get
is,
my
yeah.
tribalism in my NFL team. I can get it from
Yeah.
lots of different areas. And so, as an individual, which is the perspective I like to come at it with, all of that seems unnecessary or too complicated, or like it's not going to work out, or I see it not working out, and I just take that big step back from all that tribalism and really try not to do the judging. If there's going to be a judgment, it's going to come from God. Not going to come from me. Who am I to judge anyone anyway? Right? I'm just going to treat my fellow neighbors as best as I can. And that's where I like to go about doing it. I find it becomes problematic when groups get together and then try to force their beliefs on other people or try to control other people.
I'm
and
a
that can
fan.
be,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, that can be done very mildly with a little bit of, I don't know if coercive is the right term, but, commentary on certain things versus like physically forcing people to behave in a certain way, forcing people to pray, forcing people to do things like that. Like I haven't seen that, but I've heard things like that throughout history. I think that maybe was a thing at some point. I don't know. I'd have to ask Dapper.
There's
He's
something
the
to be
historian.
said. There's something to be said. At least this is kind of my take on it, as the atheist here, because I am very much pro people should be able to live their goddamn lives however they want, provided they're not harming anybody. Whether or not they want to have an immortal soul, whether or not they're going to go to hell or not, is not my business. That's not my job. Has nothing to do with me whatsoever. And me saying one thing or another about that has like, who am I? What the hell do I know? So even coming from a Christian background, does hell matter to how you view someone else and like what's going to happen to them in that you believe is going to happen to them in the future? Because like, what job is that of yours, I guess?
I've tried to tell people about Jesus and to witness to them. They have already heard of Jesus. And then if I try to convince them, what to me it does is it belittles their own agency in my head. And I become that controlling person that I don't like to be. And I don't feel good about it. And I don't succeed in converting anyone anyway. And then I go back and read about in the Bible where it talks about for someone to be converted, God has to actually do the work in that person's heart. Well, that's a God job. And I don't have that power. So I go back and say, what am I supposed to do then? Am I supposed to love my neighbor as myself? Yeah. Maybe if I can do that, and then God wants to move on someone, he can. But as far as like, no, I don't want any
As far as the
atheists to go to hell or anything like
problem of
that. No.
evil, right? The problem of evil being a whole other conversation. So before we go too far down that line, because I think everybody's made some interesting points. Somebody in the chat brought up a good point. What about the war on Christmas? How y'all feel about the war on Christmas?
The war on Christmas. Merry Christmas. Today is I don't remember, the third day of Orthodox Christmas. Something like that.
The war on Christmas is probably one of my favorite like events throughout the year. only because like you can see the best and worst of everybody. You see this weird odd like do you guys don't believe that anybody's actually warring on Christmas, right? Like nobody
I
actually
don't think
believes this.
so.
I actually do.
You do. Please.
Yeah. Well, I think there's just kind of at least in the United States, there's been an attempt to rewrite history, the Christian influence on the country. Because as I've looked at the documents, just kind of a general rewriting of history, and then also removing Christianity from, kind of the Christian influence on culture removed. So I was actually shocked when I read the founding documents. And even here in the United States, in my state of Virginia, there are 50 states in the United States, and one of them's Virginia, talked about the creator in the Constitution of Virginia.
Mhm.
And then I looked at all these acts of like the Continental Congress and the acts of the Virginia Assembly, official government bodies that talked about, hey, let's have a national day of prayer. Let us honor, let us promote the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to all ends of the earth. And I said, okay, I'm not saying let's impose that today, but there's been a Christian heritage that we're trying to erase from the history books. And so that's kind of my feeling. Is like,
okay. In what way do you find it's being erased then?
it's not being taught because a lot of this is not, it'd be, and then also the destruction of monuments. There's been kind
Oh
of a culture.
God, no. We're gonna talk
Oh, I'm
about
just.
no.
You topic.
Uh-oh.
I'm
All
here
right.
for it.
So
No,
maybe we shouldn't go down that
no,
path. Up
I'm
until now,
here.
we're
I
unpleasant.
am here for it. No. It's not gonna get unpleasant. We don't have to get unpleasant over statues. Go on. Sorry.
So, I mean, like, for example, uh, I've heard kind of nuances about Columbus, and I accepted like he was a bad guy. Let's destroy his statues. And then I heard the rest of the side, and just like, whoa, I'm not a historian, but I think at least one side is kind of editing out the facts. It looks really like very prejudicial, and I had a serious problem with that. I said, every human has good and bad sides, and that's okay. If you want to destroy the monument, go ahead because of his bad sides, but you got to give credit where credit's due. So uh, there. It's just like it's part of this larger cultural narrative to just demonize Christianity, and that's what I have a problem with, because the thing that it seemed that was, it's like, gee, the United States has been one of the freest, most prosperous nations in history, and they're trying to say Christianity's holding it back. You could make the case that helped facilitate a lot. And this was written by someone named Jim Holland, I think. He said he thought, he's an atheist. And then he said, when I thought about it, I said, all of my moral values are actually derived from Christianity, and I didn't know it. He said, even kind of what we consider the better parts of the Enlightenment, they echo Christian, kind of the Christian ethos. And I was like, so I'm just like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Is even if you don't believe in Christianity, you cannot separate its positive cultural influence. And it's like, okay, maybe it's had some bad things, but it's like, have at least something balanced. So that's what I had a problem with. So that's my view of the war on Christmas. It's not, if you're offended by that, I don't want to offend people, but I don't like kind of this cultural removal, and so yeah, now um, there are some things that I felt were good to remove. I graduated from Jeb Stuart High School. They have renamed it because it was a Confederate general, and the Confederates were pro-slavery. And I'm like, yeah, good on that. I'm done with that. But then when they started tearing down statues of Union generals that fought against slavery, who freed slaves, I'm like, what's that about, guys? Do you like not study history? I mean, come on. So I had,
So you're not
you
having
know,
a problem. You're not having a problem with the taking down of statues. You think they're taking down the wrong ones or doing it in the wrong way.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And we're
Okay.
electing, yeah. Is that, are
It's,
we better on?
I don't know. I don't have that. I don't have a whole ton of respect for much in general. So I mean, I'm more of the history being retaught and rewritten in America makes sense to me because the way it was taught and written in the first place was kind of fucked to begin with. And so because it was kind of already leaving out very valid and pertinent information, to be nice, we'll call it whitewashing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then it makes sense to me to rewrite and re-add in a lot of context that was not there. I don't think statues are really that important. Like, this is you belong in a museum. And that doesn't certainly mean that it's erasing the history. It's just kind of taking it from maybe a location that it doesn't need to be in because it's kind of bullshit that any of it's there to begin with and moving it to like a monument area. And it's like this can go into the museum where it belongs and we can acknowledge that this person existed and this is what they fought for and they are in the history books and nothing is being taken away from them at all in that case in my opinion.
This raises an interesting question because I really I value history, where our culture came from, good or bad. I'd like to know the truth,
I'm fine
and
with
we can.
acknowledging the negative,
Yeah,
but if you're arguing for like a balanced approach, I don't know how when some things are certainly weighed very heavily in one direction.
yeah. So like I said, my priority now is just to clean my room and kind of take care of myself. We can muse upon these things, but I'm not going to be.
You're not married to it.
I'm not going to be an activist
It's not what you're
on
here
these
for.
issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I can get that. I think that people can certainly have opinions that they don't necessarily are like I'm not pushing for this. I'm not saying anybody should do this or even take my opinion terribly seriously. This is just my kind of thought process on the matter at the moment. Um to kind of move away from that whole ball of fuck cuz this is a whole bunch of shit we just blopped on the table that we're going to just put a pin in for another day because I think there's lots of conversation to be had, but I think there's a better time and place to have it. Um, to loop back to kind of because this kind of falls into legality and social structures about what is socially acceptable. If slavery is socially acceptable at a time, do we justify slavery morally one way or another at a different point in time? And how do you kind of approach that as a tribe or as a group from a political standpoint for atheism or a political standpoint for Christians? Because I think it's pretty consistent that Christians tend to vote as a block, at least in America.
I think so. I think you can find biblical support for slavery and how things were then versus how slavery was done in America later are different, but that is still a huge can to open up and be in favor of that because that is not okay, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
at all. So to come out of that from a Christian perspective, that can be kind of difficult because of what the Bible does say about slaves obeying their masters or
Mm-hmm.
this is right and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That can be kind of difficult to try to rationalize those two. But I don't see any slavery in loving my neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't seem to fit in there at all.
we lost
Yeah.
Cindy.
Yeah, she disappeared.
I'm gonna have to turn down the heat in my room here. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, take your time. There's a Cindy's just got to lie down for a little bit. So we have I'm gonna wait for Sal to come back before I ask this question. It seems.
But regarding
sorry, go ahead.
slavery,
Yep.
I think I'm very much a libertarian as far as I think economies and nations prosper the more freedom that they are given. One thing I'm very concerned about is, in general, when power is concentrated, it tends to attract tyrants. So it's like, oh, let's fix something, so let's give the government more power. And it's usually ended up bad. So it ends up being slavery kind of in a variety of ways. And now, with taxation or whatever. And so what I'm seeing is that a lot of laws are being passed in the name of doing good, but there's a lot of people there that they're lining their pockets with these laws, and you don't realize it. I thought one of the most interesting things, it's like, oh, let's tax people to have, to rescue the poor. And then I found out the mafia was behind it. I'm like, whoa, the mafia was advocating for programs to quote unquote help the poor. Turned out there was this initiative to replace windows in public housing. And you're like, well, what's the problem with that? Well, they ended up skimming 10% of the billions of dollars you know, that were being sent to it. And so a lot of things that are put in the name of the public good, be it energy or helping the poor or whatever cause, there's often a sinister element in it and someone wanting to line his pockets. And so, to me, putting limits on how much government can intrude on your resources and your income. Here in the United States, there's kind of the thing like, okay, so you're paying, when you take all your taxes total, you've worked 6 months to feed a system. And then you have, I'm just like, that's too much of my life. That's too much of freedom to from me being wasted on a collective I have serious issues with. I'm seeing a lot of money going to school systems that are turning out junk. And I'm like, and I look at the price of what it costs to teach algebra in some schools, and this is all tied to all the government subsidies there. I'm just like, oh my goodness, it shouldn't cost that much to teach algebra. and and then what they're churning out of the universities, I said, this is to me, that's slavery. So it's robbing everyone of their freedom to think and express and live out their lives. So that's just kind of me as a Christian. So they tend to, I don't know, for whatever reason here in the United States, there's been kind of an element of, let's fight centralization of resources. I don't know that I can specifically tie it to verses in the Bible, except that even in the Bible there was a limit to how much the priests got. It was like 10%. And I'm like, okay, if how about we just are forced to donate 10% of our money and we can designate the cause. So if I don't like money going to the Defense Department, but I want it to go to education, that's fine. I don't want to have a bunch of corrupt politicians deciding for me. And there's been a thought, and I know it'll never be implemented. They said, how about cyber democracy, where we can vote? It's like you're going to put your 10% in, but you get to choose what pot of money it goes to. And the politicians are not going to let them. Yeah, the politicians are never going to want to surrender that control because that's how their pockets are lined. And here in DC, when we hear about all the bribery and subtle forms of it that are just barely legal, but they're able to get away with it, it's just kind of sickening. So, why does the Christian bloc resist that? I can't tell you why. They just seem to, maybe they're just a little bit more countercultural. But I would tend to align with, I would prefer freedom of information, freedom of speech, limited government. And maybe it's just an accident that Christians happen to be on that side of it. So there are atheists that are kind of on our side from the Ian Rand school.
Oh, Ayn Rand. Yep.
Yeah, Ayn Rand.
Objectivism.
And I don't know how that happened, but a lot of the Tea Party came from those quarters. Where
well, there's
Ian
also
Rand,
atheist group like I think he goes by Thomas Sheedy, I think is his name. It's a conservative group of atheists, and the answer is, the short answer I would say is that atheism has literally nothing to do with your politics. Atheism is just whether or not you believe in a god. And so if you don't believe you believe there is no god, what the hell does that tell you about your political structure? Literally nothing. Literally nothing. It has nothing to, all it does is say that, hey, maybe the Bible doesn't influence or doesn't inform my political structure directly. And now that's not to whitewash out whatever social and historical context there might be from wherever you happen to live. It just means that you're not reading the Bible to take cues to inform your political decisions. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure that what I said made sense.
You're really
that
the
makes
first.
sense.
You're the first person I've heard say that explicitly. Because there are some people that there was a movement like atheism's more than atheism plus and all this. I'm just like, well, that's not really atheism. It's your add-on, and
Right,
So
yeah,
you're the first one.
yeah, the conversation we had last time we were talking about this, we had a bunch of atheists on, and we're going to have a couple of atheists on to respond to sort of your criticisms on the atheist slash religious groups or in so what I'm looking for experiences that you guys have had later on this month. But there's the kind of conclusion that we were starting to draw was that there doesn't really make sense to have a Christian block of voters or have a block of voters that are a religious group and having that religious sect dictate what they're voting for the same way it doesn't make sense to have an atheist group that does this. What seems to make the most sense is to have some fundamental rules or expectations or guidelines that are do no harm, or that are we want people to be as free as possible, or we want a small government, or whatever your political affiliation may or may not be, and take the religious part out of that conversation. So you would have like a secular humanist group. So the secular humanist group is to say, hey, listen, we're not going to have religion be part of this. We want freedom of religion as best as we can, and we want humanism to prevail, which basically is just the following of we want humans to be able to be as free as possible and live the best lives as possible with as little restrictions as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like freedom of thought, and I mean, just from I think at least the three panelists tonight, it's like we don't like stuff being shoved down our throat.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on board
We're in
with all of
charge.
that.
Yeah.
I
I'm on board
mean,
with
I
all
may
of
be
that.
wrong, but I think I need the freedom to be able to figure it out myself.
I think there's something to be said about like what, in your opinion, as somebody, both of you who have kind of gotten a little bit away from certain religious aspects of your life and come back to other religious aspects of your life. From your experience, is there anything that you think atheists could do better as like general groupages versus anything that like the church could potentially do better? Because I know the church is constantly 24/7 complaining and looking for like, we're losing people, what do we do?
Right. I think there's maybe one thing. There are certain ways to view something that an atheist might find controversial in the Bible. And the principle of charity can really come into play. What are they really trying to say here versus taking the worst possible hot take to bash it down, set up a straw man and bash it down?
Yeah, Sal
I've
likes
seen some
Sal
atheists
likes
do
Jordan
that.
Peterson. Get out of here.
I love
I've seen
Jordan
some-
Peterson.
No. I'm
I adore
melting.
Jordan Peterson. I'm killing you, Chesh.
Oh no, it's over.
Oh, it's over.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, man.
Oh, I lost my train of thought. I think I was mostly done with my point. It was a
Sorry,
quick
you were
point.
saying that people the principle of
Yeah,
charity instead of taking
if
the
you
word
give, you can find biblical support for just about anything you want if you want to nitpick. There's a lot of words in there. Why not try to find the best possible interpretation of something and go with that? Especially if you claim to believe the Bible and want to follow it, want to practice what it teaches. And sometimes when I see atheists argue against biblical things, they'll give like the worst interpretation of what a passage might mean. And that's just what people do in general. But, if that's the one nitpick I'm going to have, then I don't think it's that big a deal because people do that in general. Like I said before, People are people, whether they believe in God or not, and they behave with certain patterns, and you'll just see it over and over. And smarter people than me can define those and identify them easier. I just kind of play it by ear all the time when I do it. But
so you think kind of more charity all around?
I think that's a good idea from everyone, especially now. And people always say, especially now, but if you look at the world right now, it's always true. Like a little more charity from everybody could go a long way.
That sounds like
as opposed to a lot
communism.
of charity from a little people.
Do
Yeah, I guess
you,
it does.
how do you deal with, in that case, how do you deal with like sort of an extremist point of view from either atheist or Christianity?
I tend to ignore those nowadays because you can go in and start fighting, but at that point you're feeding a troll.
Yeah, in some cases, yeah, fair.
And if you want to feed a troll, that's fine, as long as you're aware that that's what you're doing and are okay with it. Yeah, there you go. But if not, you might get a little upset for no reason because trolls got a troll.
What do you think, Sal?
Well, for me, I'd say there's a distinction between the new atheists and the other kinds. I don't know how long that lasted.
The new
And
atheism
people were
plus
giving me a
stuff?
hard time. I said, I really like the old atheists. The old atheists like Bertrand Russell, and I really like John Stuart Mill. And if you'll permit me, he said, and this is from On Liberty, he said, first, if any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for aught we can certainly know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. Second, though the silenced opinion be an error, it may, and very commonly does, contain a portion of truth. And since the general or prevailing opinion on any subject is rarely or never the whole truth, it is only by the collision of adverse opinions that the remainder of the truth has any chance of being supplied. Thirdly, even if the received opinion may not be only true, but the whole truth, unless it is suffered to be and actually is, vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in a manner of a prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. And not only this, but fourthly, the meaning of the doctrine itself will be in danger of being lost or enfeebled and deprived of its vital effect on the character and conduct. The dogma of becoming a mere formal profession, inefficacious for good, but cumbering the ground and preventing the growth of any real and heartfelt conviction from reason or personal experience. So, as I've seen dogmatism sometimes start to infect the atheist community and a little bit of tribalism, I think this is the cure for it. And so that's what I feel. I love that attitude. And I love, to me, that represented old atheism. And that's the old atheism that I really respected. And I said, this is what you know, it's been hopefully seen in me when I joined Dapper Dino and we're bashing other creationists. I said, yeah, let's entertain contrary opinions. And I don't care. Let's just speak our conscience. And that's okay.
I think there's
We're not going to
certainly
condemn people as evil or whatever for just speaking, expressing their skepticism about anything.
well,
And
you
that's
run
cool.
into the question of like thought crime versus like so like oh it's my opinion that yada 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 versus this is being imposed on you as a group, right? So you can take like LGBTQ plus people, right? Which is a lot of where the atheism plus stuff went in that kind of political direction, right? And so I think there's a difference between having a conversation about whether or not people ought to be treated as people and ought to be their rights ought to be protected, which I think we all here agree with that people's rights and freedoms should be protected. Like nobody's disagreeing with that. And your opinions are your opinions about whether or not you agree with somebody's lifestyle. Like I can sit here and say I would disagree with wanting to live this life for myself when it comes to eating like 7 pizzas a day. That seems like a lot of pizza to me. But if people are consensually eating 7 pizzas a day, it's not my job to tell them that they can't do that, right? So, but how do you square a lot of that? Because I think for the most part, I agree. This is Debate Hub after all. I agree with having people's opinions and having conversations about those opinions, even if those are difficult conversations to have. And even if I staunchly disagree with somebody, in fact, great, come disagree with me. But how do you square some of that away with something like the paradox of tolerance, where you're like, okay, listen, we're gonna hear you out. Do you think that that's maybe a way of like how it's handled, or like how the conversation is actually approached?
Well, it's easier if we have specific examples. So
Oh,
you
sure.
you brought up LGBTQ.
Mhm.
Um, and it's very interesting that how I've seen this play out uh, in a non-Christian context. So we've had the feminine. And again, you're probably way more knowledgeable than I am on this topic. But I
Mm.
saw the feminists having some issues. There's a segment of the feminists that have kind of a derogatory label called TERF, and they were
Oh, this direction. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
and they were it was all this fighting between the trans people and the TERFs, and I said, this is where I'm kind of separating it from the Christian
Yeah,
discussion, but
yeah.
it did raise an interesting problem. It's like who's right, and then also like with the trans, there's been something in the atheist community, a discussion about trans athletes in women's
Oh,
sports,
yep.
something like that. And
Mhm.
this was a real hot topic, and I said, for one, I don't know how to solve this, but there are people on
Mhm.
both sides that have really strong feelings on that. And um, I think that's one situation where you ask the question, what do you do about tolerance? And this is where I give you a big I don't know.
Mhm.
And I don't want to even go there
Yeah.
at this
Yeah,
point.
that's fair.
I
The
think I just,
entire there it's a really difficult conversation to have, and it's a conversation that
right,
needs to be had with the right people involved, with the right
right.
level of knowledge involved, in the right setting, with the right like it needs to be presented in the way that is actually valuable and
Right.
useful, and people who actually have enough knowledge to be able to hold that discussion.
And I think this raises, okay, from a Christian standpoint, I'll say,
Mhm.
as an outsider to this discussion,
Mhm.
like the turf versus the trans, I said this fundamentally raises the problem is when you have kind of these things that are almost quasi moral issues among this is right, this one group says this is right, another group says this is right. The
Mhm.
problem that arises is who decides what's right. And 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 for me personally, I said, okay, as a Christian, I have my strong opinions because I believe what's right is decided by the maker of all laws. But what I've seen is these situations, I would predict there may not be a resolution because um, everyone has their idea of, you know, what ultimately is right. And I'm like, I don't know how I
More
could say I don't believe in God, therefore this is the right thing to do. I
moral
don't know where
philosophy
you would.
is very, very, very difficult. Yes.
So
Only
so
about
I'm
8
just saying
billion different
I don't know how
opinions.
I could fix that. Honestly, I'm giving you a big I don't know.
Yeah.
If apart from a God of the universe deciding this is right or wrong, I don't know how humans can um, uh, tease apart what's right and wrong because sometimes it may boil down to their whims. And that's the thing that if I had to say, if I observed in the atheist community, I kind of saw this coming because unless you believe that there is a transcendent moral law, it becomes kind of difficult.
It makes it
And it's
easy to
playing,
agree on when everybody agrees that one guy says what's right, right? One guy being God. If God's like,
Right.
"Hey, this is right, this is wrong," it's a lot easier to part like there isn't
yeah,
much discussion or debate to be had
right. And
around
let me
nuance.
contrast that from my field, like in engineering physics. We don't have debates about the fundamentals. We may get like in cosmology and origins,
Mhm.
but when I go to we don't I don't have a lot of argument over math. I can't remember, maybe only one or two arguments I've had with someone about math, and usually we it got worked out.
Mhm.
I mean, there have been historically some things that were very, very contentious, but they didn't last long. And I said, I contrast that with, gee, it's so clear what's right and wrong in mathematics, and then secondarily basic physics, not kind of the fringy experimental, theoretical stuff. But then when when I look at questions in humanity, I'm like, there are debates, there are disagreements all the time, and I've had a hard time trying to reconcile that. And I said, I think the fundamental problem is people don't agree what's true. I mean,
Sure.
that looks kind of like,
Right.
oh, duh. But I mean, in math and basic physics and chemistry, there's not a lot of disagreement. And I said that just doesn't seem to happen in human interactions. That and it's just satisfying to think there's a right and a wrong answer from that standpoint. If for nothing else, that's why I think I kind of like the idea of God, because there's a thought that there is a right and a wrong answer, but without a God, and I think there are some atheists who've said without God deciding what's right and wrong, there really isn't a right or wrong. It's whatever you want, and like, well, okay, then it's going to be a battle of which group has more power to impose their views on the other. There's not inherently a right or wrong. I mean, that's my understanding of it.
I think there can be a right or wrong in certain ethical frameworks. If you're gonna look at like some Kantian ethics or is it utilitarianism, you can follow the rules and discover what's right or wrong from that perspective.
And Smitty makes a good point in the chat. It says it's subjective to God's opinion, or it's subjective to the interpretation of what God's opinion may or may not be. Right? It's all has to be filtered through us anyway, so ultimately doesn't make a difference. Slicks asks, serious question: if God is all powerful and can do anything, can God have a Twitter account? Is there anything stopping this from happening? I don't think so. I think if God really wanted to, God could have a Twitter account. I don't see why not.
Agreed. Yeah, God wanted to have one.
The fact that he doesn't have one, as far as we're aware, shows that Bent is probably right as to why would he want one.
Maybe he'll have one in the future, but not now.
Slicks also asked earlier, I'd like to ask the panel a question. How many times have you seen an atheist talking in public trying to get them to give up religion?
I have never seen that before. If you're talking about the way like street preachers will preach on the street,
that's what they're talking
I've
about.
never seen anything like that before. It's interesting.
I've seen videos of it. It was street epistemologist Peter Boghossian.
I've seen a bit of street epistemology, not so much preaching. I don't think I've ever seen it personally.
And I think I know where he's headed. Is that, and I actually appreciate that point. Is there's not as much atheist evangelism.
That's true. And it certainly exists.
I'm actually impressed by that.
Yeah, there's
very insightful comment. Good observation.
My Unfinished Journey for 5 says, 2-part question. 1, does Sal have a Patreon? And part 2 is, why not?
I don't have a Patreon because they siphon off 10%, and personal PayPal business accounts only 3, and I'm trying to make it a personal PayPal, and it's free. But thank you for asking.
Sal's got a business plan. That's what we're talking about now. I don't know. I think that there's like a lot.
If you're curious what it is, just go to my website. I mean, Evidence and Reasons.
There's links down below.
And then it has a little link if you want. But that's, thank you for asking. And Dapper's here.
Dapper's been here the whole time. Dapper's been picking on all y'all in the chat the whole time. There's definitely something to be said about how prevalent like fundamental evangelical positions take root in different kinds of groups just in general. Like you can see it in any kind of tribe. I think that you'll see like, no, I'm a fan of this particular sports team, and you should be a fan of this team too. In fact, your team sucks, and here's a list of reasons why your team sucks. And I don't know if I'm not down to shut down conversation for the most part. I will be critical about the way different conversation are approached, right? So I try to be very careful about specific topics. There are plenty of times where I see like a minority group having or taking issue with something a corporation is doing, for example. And I tend to say, like, I have my opinion, but I keep that shit to myself and just try and bolster what they have to say because they have something that's more valuable or they add more to the conversation than what I could add because one, I don't have the experience, and two, it's not really, I'm not the one who's offended by this. This isn't my fight to take unless asked. If somebody comes up to me and says like, "Hey, listen, I'm having a problem with this," da, 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 and I mean like I don't mean personally asked, I mean asked in general. If there's an outcry to be like for Cindy, for example, if there's an outcry to say, "Hey, listen, I just need help with this particular issue," then I am more than happy to like shout that kind of issue out and have that kind of conversation. But if it's something that like I haven't been invited to this conversation and nobody asked me, I'm totally fine to just be like, okay, let me know if you need. I'm here if you need help. But I am very white and very female, so there's particular issues that I just tend to stay away from because they're not. I don't have the experience or the knowledge that somebody else could bring that I think his voice is more valuable in that situation.
Yeah, I keep my opinion to myself a lot of times, but on a lot of things, I don't really have much of an opinion anyway anymore. Because what's like, you can have an opinion, but what's the point if it's something that's ethical and controversial and there's not going to be a right answer before I die in decades? Like, okay, I can have an opinion, but I shouldn't make too much out of it, and I shouldn't try to, for me, force that opinion on others. Like maybe I used to
Sure.
back in the past, because, like I said, that church that was treating me a certain way, like I picked up on those habits. I knew how to treat people in similar ways.
There's
It's not
a point in the
fun.
chat. I just want to point it out that about this 10%, and I'm like, in before Sal is a sovereign citizen. We're teasing. All right.
Yeah.
I think we should probably start wrapping it up there. Do you guys have any last thoughts and last words on your experience in either atheist groups and what atheist groups could do better when dealing with somebody either coming out of or skirting that gray line between kind of finding their faith or losing their faith?
That is a good question. Not much from my interaction with atheists that I spend time with. I've found a good group of people and I just stay with them. So I don't have too many interactions with atheists that are controlling or harsh on me because of my faith. Or I probably know a few anti-theists, but they don't they don't talk to me about it. You
Oh,
know,
they're more talking about the general, not the individual.
and I think a lot of it is, I don't know if bashing is the right word, but being very highly critical of institutionalized Christianity as a whole, like in America nationally, which is a big thing to be pretty critical of. So as far as me and Christianity, I think that's always on a personal, individual level. So that's how I try to treat it.
What do you think, Sal?
So the question was, do I have any pointers for people that are kind of between faith and atheism?
Both, actually. Do you have pointers for them, but do you have pointers for the atheist community about what it could do better in regards to either how they treat those people or how they approach that scenario?
Well, I mentioned John Stuart Mill, but specific examples in the present day. I liked Dino's channel. I felt he was, and the community he has. So be like the people there. They're sweet. They're kind. They interact, and I think it's just a nice community. And they have people like Chesh. So just hang around more people like that. That's what I would say. You'd be better because I mean I got to tell you I've got some people that are so hostile to me now, and they're just vile.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, and I see it on both the Christian and atheist side, but they're just it's a really toxic environment. And I mentioned some of the battles that go on in the atheist community, and it is scary between each other. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, whoever you are, whatever your views or disbelief is, I just don't want to be around people like you. It is just toxic. And there's a lot of narcissism there and personality cults. There really are like personality cults.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I've gotten flack from creationists. Why do you hang around Dapper Dino so much? It's like, he's a great guy and the community's great. We got people like Bent and the other people on the channel. And I said that was a very interesting mix. You had Christians, agnostics, and an atheist there, and we were able to get along. We weren't at each other's throats. And I
Mhm.
said that's a beautiful model where we can have really intensely strong disagreement on some things, but we treated each other really well.
Mhm.
So that's sincere. Now I don't hang around Dapper's channel that much, but I'd say the experience was just beautiful. And people like Erica,
Mhm.
Erica is an agnostic. I'm just like, you know, um, just that's is it inherent that people are either nice or mean? I don't know, but I just know that I like that community. So that's what I'd say for the atheists that are leaning toward the atheist side. For the Christians that were more like me, you can hang out my channel. You'll be nerded out to death and be bored to tears because I cover a lot of science stuff. So that's about all that I have, as far
So
as
you're saying
observation.
be picky and choosy. Don't get too attached to a group until you can kind of find a group that meshes with you and settle in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and hang around nice people. Gosh, you hang around people that are mean and toxic, you start to adopt their way of life,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so I mean, it was refreshing to be on this channel and then be on Dabber Dino's channel. And there have been some others other channels run by atheists that are really sweet, kind people, and I'm just like, this is kind of refreshing. Um,
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. You are what you eat, and be careful who you hang around with. Garbage goes in, garbage comes out. So be picky and choosy about what you consume. On the end note of this, I want to say thank you both for joining. Thank you, Cindy, who is now away. Please go find everybody's links down below. If I am correct, there is a Kent with Bent tonight, and there's going to be some new
Yep.
music featured.
Yes, there is. I'm very excited. Season 2 of Kent with Bent starts in about 20 minutes. And there's going to
Oh,
be another 100 episodes for season 2.
well, hell
So,
yeah, we're here for Kent with Ben. I'm going to be swinging by there in the chat if you are so interested. My Unfinished Journey for 5 says, I am one of the atheists who appreciates and supports all 3 guest panelists. So thank you very much, My Unfinished Journey. Again, links are down below. I would like to add that maybe, because we touched on a lot of like political stuff, maybe we're going to have Sal on and maybe have a little bit of counterpoint on that. Look at him. He knows he got himself in trouble.
I did.
It's okay. It's okay. We can have that discussion another time, another place, in an appropriate venue for that one. We'll be nice to each other. I'm sure it'll be fine. Um, and maybe we can end on this kind of passive thought from myself, which is maybe your religion should have less influence on your politics, and maybe that one should have less to do with the other, because judging people and enforcing laws on them is God's job, not your job. So, maybe.
I
I
can't
don't know.
disagree.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll come back again another time. Join us next time. I'm also going to be live tomorrow with DeFango talking about his experiences with death. And that's going to be a grand old time. So, thanks everybody for coming. And we will see you next time. Say goodbye.
Everybody, thanks for coming by.
Bye. Thanks, Chesh. Nice seeing you, Ben. God bless.